The latest. Thank you for your love and support. I appreciate you all. The Western powers sitting in the United Nations Security Council thought it was going to be just another Tuesday, business as usual. Another day of empty speeches, shifting papers, and lecturing African nations on democracy. But on May 28, 2026, the Alliance of Sahel States, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger marched into the room and completely flipped the script. They didn't come to beg. They didn't come to compromise. And they sure as hell didn't come to be lectured. They came to deliver a brutal reality check straight to the faces of the global superpowers. For decades, the standard playbook for African diplomats at the UN was to smile, take the foreign aid, and tolerate the fact that Western capitals were pulling the strings behind the scenes. But what we saw at this meeting was a completely new era of African geopolitics. The representative from Burkina Faso stood up, speaking not just for his country, but as a unified front for three nations that have completely kicked out Western materials, torn up old colonial defense pacts, and taken total control over their own destiny. And look at how he started. He didn't waste time with diplomatic sweet talk. He went straight, targeting the foundational myth of the United Nations itself. He took them all the way back to 1945, reminding the Security Council that this entire global system was supposedly built to protect the sovereign equality of all states and save the world from the scourge of war.
Representative Faso speaks.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Council, it is an honor and a responsibility to speak on behalf of the peoples of Burkina Faso, the Republic of Mali, and the Republic of Niger, united within the Confederation of Sahel States. We commend the Chinese presidency of the Security Council for including on the agenda of this meeting a highly topical issue, that of respecting the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter and strengthening the international system centered on the UN. Mr. President, in 1945, the peoples of the world made a bet on peace. They entrusted the United Nations with the secret mission of protecting them from the scourge of war. 80 years later, conflicts are multiplying and intensifying, and civilian populations are paying the heaviest price. Desami Asane Sete, it must be acknowledged with bitterness that our common organization is far from having kept this founding promise. Yet the founding principles of the Charter remain strikingly relevant. Article 2, in particular, is the foundation of the sovereign equality of all states, the peaceful settlement of disputes, and the prohibition of the use of force and threats. So it is not the Charter that has failed, but the political will of some to respect it that is lacking. The facts are there and they are overwhelming. The sovereign equality of states is nothing more than an empty phrase for the most powerful. Raw force has become the norm again, and the Charter is being manipulated. It is brandished when it serves and simply ignored when it is inconvenient. This provision related to human rights, fundamental freedoms, and development are applied variably depending on whether the concerned state fits into the strategic calculations of the major powers. The promise of peace, development, and respect for human rights enshrined in the Charter remains a broken promise. betrayed by inaction towards some and by illegal interventionism against others, betrayed in its ideals of fraternity among sovereign nations called to build together a world of shared progress. How can we not denounce here the cynicism of those who brandish the Charter to legitimize illegal actions while blatantly disregarding it when their interests demand it? In the Sahel, we have been the direct victims of this. Proven support for terrorist groups, covert funding of destabilizers, plundering of natural resources, and orchestrated propaganda campaigns to discredit sovereign states that dared to say no. The Confederation of Sahel States denounces and condemns with the utmost firmness these actions that reflect an overt neocolonialism, contrary to all the provisions of the Charter. Faced with these abuses that undermine the very foundations of our organization and durably compromise international peace and security, the time for declarations of principle is over. We must act. We must put an end to indecent colonialist ambition through a profound reform of the Security Council and actions aimed at enforcing the United Nations Charter. Mr. President, it is in this context of abandonment and international hypocrisy that the peoples of the Sahel have chosen to rise. They refused resignation under the leadership of their Excellencies Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of FASO, Head of State, General of the Army Assimi Goïta, President of the Transition of Mali, Head of State, and General of the Army Abdourahmane Tiani, President of the Republic of Niger. The heads of state, our populations have exercised their most fundamental sovereign right, that of deciding their own future. It is in this spirit of dignity and responsibility that the heads of state of the Confederation have committed their actions by pooling their efforts to ensure the security of the populations of the Sahel while creating the conditions for sustainable development of their states. The Confederation of Sahel States comes here to demand that the UN leave, but we call for true multilateralism rooted in the United Nations system and in strict adherence to its charter. A multilateralism that places humanity above geopolitical interest, that works for peace, security, and justice for all peoples without exception. A multilateralism that resolutely promotes dialogue, prohibits the use of force, and unequivocally condemns terrorism as well as all those who finance, arm, or propagate it in the Sahel and everywhere else. This multilateralism demands courageous reforms. The authority of the General Assembly, the most representative and democratic body of our organization, must be restored, and it must be given the means to overcome the blockages caused by the politicization of the Security Council. The UN 80 initiative, marking the 80th anniversary of the UN, offers a historic opportunity to rebuild the organization on fairer, more inclusive foundations, truly serving all the peoples of the world. The Confederation of Sahel States is and will remain committed to building this just and equitable multilateral system. We stand firm, sovereign, and determined. We reach out to all those who share the ideal of a world where the sovereignty and dignity of every state, regardless of its size, are respected unconditionally. Thank you.
After 80 years, the bitter reality is that the UN has fundamentally failed. This is the core of the commentary we need to understand. The Sahel Alliance is exposing a massive double standard that the West has used for generations. They are calling it the selective Geometry of the powerful. Think about that. When a Western superpower wants to invade a country or protect its corporate interests, the UN Charter is magically ignored. But the moment an African nation decides to assert its own sovereignty, sadly, the West wants to brandish the rule book and talk about international law. The script is flipped. The Sahel is saying out loud what the rest of the continent has been whispering for decades. Brute force has become the norm, and the UN Charter is nothing more than a weaponized tool for the great powers. But the most explosive part of this address wasn't just the critique of the UN, it was the direct accusation of sabotage. The alliance openly accused Western powers of running a shadow war in the desert. We are talking about overt support for T groups, hidden financing for political spoilers, the systematic plundering of natural resources, and massive media propaganda campaigns designed to destroy the credibility of any African state that dares to say no to the West. This isn't just standard political theater. This is a direct declaration of geopolitical war on the global stage. What Washington and Paris failed to realize is that the old order in West Africa is dead. The trio of young leaders, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, General Assimi Goïta, and General Abdourahamane Tchiani, are operating on a completely different frequency. The West keeps calling them military juntas, trying to isolate them from the global community. But back home, the masses see them as the architects of a second independence. They are pooling their military resources, securing their own borders on their own terms, and proving that Africa does not need a Western security umbrella to survive. The bottom line is this. The alliance of AES just put the entire global establishment on notice. They are demanding total overhaul of the UN Security Council, wanting to strip the superpowers of their absolute veto power and return control to the democratic floor of General Assembly. They are standing upright. They are sovereign and they are completely rewriting the rules of engagement. The message from the desert is clear. The days of exploiting Africa under the guise of international law or diplomacy are officially over. The African, like Paul Kagame said, we will no longer allow them to come with democracy and human rights with one hand, and then the other one, they will be taking the resources. The leaders in Africa, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, are not only talking, even though we see that other African leaders like Paul Kagame is calling on the other ones to add value to themselves and make sure that they are firm in taking their decisions, that when it is no, it should be no. That it's better they take the no and face the consequences, the sanctions today, than to accept or take the easy path by pleasing them while generations to come will suffer. The leaders in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have taken their part. They have made things clear. They wouldn't allow people to determine the terms and conditions for them anymore. And Africa is rising. As much as they try to brand them, like someone came and was telling us, it's because they are not in Mali, that's why we are seeing the attacks. Yet the same person has forgotten that he has been in Mali for over 10 years. Or 10 years and we didn't see any show. The T only increased. So the people love them. Africans will love the leaders in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso because of how they have been able to take back the sovereignty of the African into the hands of the African. The message is simple. We are not going back, and nothing is going to bring the African back to exploitation. This is a new era, and people must accept the decision that the African has made. We are the only ones that can set ourselves free. United we stand, divided we fall. And united we keep standing forever and ever. The greatest enemy of the African is mental slavery. So let's decolonize ourselves from mental slavery. Let's keep sharing to educate our brothers and sisters. Together we make Africa great for ourselves and the next generations that are going to come. So that's the latest around the world in Africa, West Africa, and in AES.